Hello, BookTube. It's Friday, and I have a Friday Reads for you, a batch of books that I'm either working on or intend to read in the next few days. And the first one is a reread that I was a bit too dismissive of last year. So I'm going to go back at it this year, and it's not out of the blue that I'm going back at it. The book is Michael Hicks. It's by Michael Hicks. This is Richard III, and I was dismissive of it because of the subtitle, The Self-Made King, when in all the ranks of English royalty and all the ranks of royalty just anywhere in any country at any time, there has never been a king less self-made than Richard, unless you're talking about it in the most cynical terms imaginable, right? I mean, I guess you could say you're a self-made king if you kill all the rival claimants to the throne. That's just so incredibly cynical that I think I had kind of a sideways smirk on my face the whole time I was reading this. There's actually quite a bit of good thought and good writing in here about not only Richard but his whole time, about the whole era. And it's not random, because I'm studying that time in order to review a book about the Wars of the Roses and the House of York and Lancaster. So this is going to help anyway. I'm going to be reading Charles Ross on Edward IV and Richard III, but I want to read this as well. I'm going to reread this today. Not only because I want the scent fresh in my mind when I write about the House of York, but also because I think I might have done this book a misservice. I think I might have been a little more resistant to it than it deserved. I mean, it might not have been the author's choice to make such a weird subtitle. So that is the one that I know. All the others here are books that I haven't read, which is kind of bad, because we're in June now. We're firmly lodged in June. These are all, allegedly, as far as I know, these are all June books. Maybe some of them, some of the last ones we look at are Oxford's. Maybe Oxford University Press has been showing a tendency to postpone their publication dates because of the pandemic. So maybe these aren't. I haven't double checked, but they're on my list anyway. Even so, I will reread them closer to their actual pub date. Like, for instance, this one has a pub date of the end of June, and I haven't checked. This is from Simon & Schuster. I haven't checked to see whether or not that is still true. But this is I'm working my way along my June shelf. I have all these June releases, and I want to start doing things with them. So, and this is an extremely infuriating subject. So I might as well get it under my belt and then read it again calmer when it comes out in the finished copy, if I get a finished copy. I'm not getting finished copies for a lot of things. This is by Robert P. Jones, and it is called White Too Long: The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. And the author's contention in this book is that that legacy is of basically co-joined twins. That American Christianity, especially fundamentalist Christianity, especially Southern fundamentalist Christianity, is indistinguishable from white supremacy, and from the Ku Klux Klan and a bunch of other movements. And I dipped into this to see what kind of an ambit it would have, how big a focus it would be, and I wanted to read you a bit about the murder of Medgar Evers. We're go all the way back to 1963. Evers stayed at the church to finish some work. A colleague of his says, "See you at the office tomorrow, Medgar. Good night." And we're told Evers stayed at the church to finish some work before heading home to his wife and 3 young children. As Evers got out of his car just after midnight, a gunman shot him and killed him in the driveway. The murder weapon, including a fresh fingerprint on the rifle scope, was found in a field nearby and traced to Byron de la Beckwith, Jr., a member of the White Citizens Council in Greenwood and an active member of the Greenwood Episcopal Church of the Nativity. Beckwith was well known across the Delta for his published letters to the editor that regularly mixed Christianity with white supremacy, with passages such as, and then the author quotes from one of those letters. He has a stronger stomach than I do, that's for sure. I'm not going to quote from it. And the author goes on. Just 2 years before murdering Evers, when Beckwith heard rumors that black visitors might try to attend his own church, he arrived early and stood on the steps with a pistol, declaring to his fellow members that he would handle things. As Beckwith's first trial for Evers' murder, the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, an official state agency operating from 1956 to 1977 to preserve segregation, illegally investigated potential jurors to help his defense attorneys weed out Jews and blacks. Governor Ross Barnett personally appeared in the courtroom, shaking hands with Beckwith in full view of the jury. 2 successive trials with all-white juries failed to reach a decision. Guys, print was on the murder weapon. And he all but admitted to it. And 2 successive trials with all white juries failed to reach a decision. And then this final line that is just a punch in the stomach. Beckwith was not brought to justice until the 3rd trial finally convicted him in 1994. 1994. This book is going to be full of that kind of outrage. And I don't know what the end result will be. I mean, I haven't even, aside from dipping into that one thing, because I've read up on Medgar Evers a bit, I haven't looked at the rest of it. So I don't know. A book like this will spend a lot of its time laying out the facts, laying out the history. But I imagine that Robert P. Jones will eventually come to some sort of oversight, overview, conclusion even. And I don't know what that will be. I don't know what brands you would pick from the burning there. Would there be any? Or will all of American Christianity be indicted in this book? And will it be justified? I don't know. I have no idea. We shall see. And then moving from there to literature, to purely literary pursuits, we have Marjorie Garber, who a lot of you will know from her great book, Shakespeare After All. She's fantastic. She's a fantastic thinker, a fantastic scholar. And this is her new book, which, again, this is dated for the late June, but I don't know if that's true. This is FSG, Frost, and Giroux, but I don't know if they've moved it or not. And this is Character. A big study about character. How do we think about it? What do we think it means? Why do we value it? Or in what instances don't we value it? Exactly the sort of thing. I mean, I love her book on Shakespeare. I love that. And I love her other books, too. But there's something about letting a first-rate thinker just loose on a big amorphous subject like this. There's something about that is just tremendously appealing to me. I don't know what direction she'll go in at all, because again, like with the rest of these things, I don't have any idea. I haven't touched these things. Then this next one is Harvard University Press, and again, this is a June date. This is do I have a date on this? This is no, it just says June. But this is a book we've already seen on this channel, and got quite a bit of interest. I love that. I used to love that most of all, that factor about our old book hauls, when I used to get 10 books a day or something like that, and I would open them all and show them all to you. One of the things I loved about that, aside from just the company, was that I would get a chance to gauge what interests you all, and what doesn't. I loved hearing that, and a lot of you expressed interest in this book. This is by Andrew Miller, and it's called On Not Being Someone Else, Tales of Our Unled Lives, with a window overlooking Central Park there. Andrew Miller illuminate. We each live one life formed by paths taken and untaken. Choosing a job, getting married, deciding on a place to live or whether to have children, early decisions preclude another. But what if you've gone the other way? It can be a seductive thought, even a haunting one, and often, in the case of a lot of people I know, a tormenting one. Are you like that? Do you ever spend time thinking about the different path that would have broken off from a choice you made years and years ago? And maybe you made the choice wrong? Do you ever beat yourself up about something like that? Do you think about your alternate lives, your alternate selves? I do all the time. Andrew Miller illuminates this theme of modern culture, the allure of the alternate self. From Robert Frost to Sharon Olds, Virginia Woolf to Ian McEwan, Jane Hirschfield to Carl Dennis, storytellers of every stripe write of the lives we didn't have. What forces encourage us to think this way about ourselves, and to identify with fictional and poetic voices speaking from the shadows of what might have been? Not only poets and novelists, but psychologists and philosophers have much to say on this question. The author finds wisdom in all of these sources, revealing the beauty, the power, and the struggle of our unled lives. I don't ordinarily, a slim volume like this in which an author, these are basically flip sides of the same coin for me, because they can be terrible. I mean, Marjorie Garber, Andrew Miller, I'm not 100% sure, who is he? He's the author of Burdens of Perfection and Novels Behind Glass. Okay, I don't think I know those books. So Marjorie Garber, you tell me, okay, I've got an author named Marjorie Garber, and I would smile, who's going to write a long book on just ruminating about a philosophical subject and a disembodied subject. I would say, great, give it to me, more power to her. But the same token, if it was an author I didn't know, as in this case, I know an Andrew Miller, but he's a novelist. I don't think it's the same guy. I might say, well, that sounds horrifying. What if this is just philosophical flapdoodle from start to finish. So we shall see. I don't know. I like the tenor of the back cover, but then again, I'm supposed to, right? So we shall see. And then these last two books are the ones I was talking about. They're Oxford University Press. So although they have June dates, I don't know that that will be true. I don't know that. You want to check if you're not sure. And these are interest to you. They're both of interest to me. They're both World War II. And I love World War II. I can't get enough of reading about it. And they are brackets. They are bookends. Totally unintentionally, I'm sure, on the part of their authors. But still, they are the fanatics and the price they paid. This is the opposite ends of the same spectrum. When the fanatic thinks they're going to rule the world and that their fanaticism is going to sweep all before it, and then what happens when it all comes crashing down into ruin. And the first one is by Robert Galati, and it is Hitler's True Believers: How Ordinary People Became Nazis. And that's I don't know if you can see in the glare. That's what it's going to look like. It's a tiny little thing. And this is the story of how the on the surface lunatic ideas of the Nazi Party managed to attract a base, managed to attract a lot of people to fill those rallies and enthusiastically cheer for a foaming at the mouth madman. You only have to listen to Hitler in private or in public. We have all the public stuff, but we also have in-depth, detailed memorata of the private stuff, and he was no more rational or sequential in those private meetings than he was in public. And it got worse as time went on. He got worse. And the bigger the crowds got, the more power he had, the less coherent he became. And yet, you had a sizable portion of the German public that were willing to go along, that looked at these ideas that I firmly believe 15 years ago, if you'd looked at the same platform without Hitler and said, what do you think? They'd have said, oh, what on earth? What are you talking about? What, are we going back to the Dark Ages? None of this makes sense. Those same Germans, some of them, would have said, what is all this fine print about the Jews? These people are my neighbors. They're my friends. They're my business colleagues. What are you talking about? It's as a scholar put it about 25 years ago, but people have been saying this all along. Hitler said in the 20s, in a book called Mein Kampf, what he wanted to do to the Jews. Hitler said what he wanted to do to the Jews while he was campaigning for office. And then he did it. No one could claim they would be surprised. No one. Surprise was not an element. And this is all about that. there have been many, many books on this subject. What happened in Germany to cause so many people, good, upstanding people, to just give way to their darker angels, to the darker impulses of humanity, and in such numbers, and without coercion. I mean, there was quite a bit of collusion that was done at gunpoint, that was done at bayonet point. But there was a lot that wasn't, and this is going to be about that. This is going to be about how the Nazis forged their weirdo, horrible, malicious program into something that could actually gain some measure of popular support. So that is the beginning. That is the beginning of the spectrum, is when the fanatics are taking over and they are sweeping everything before them. And then this next one, also from Oxford, is by Francine Hirsch, and this is the end of the spectrum. This is Soviet Judgment at Nuremberg. Don't even have a workup cover for this. So this could easily be postponed. And this is about the Nuremberg trials, which are fascinating in the history of the civilized West. Just fascinating for what they are and for what they weren't. I've read so many books about the Nuremberg trials. I'm always up for another one. And it's going to be weird. I'm going to read these two side by side. I'm going to read them back to back. So first I'll do the Galati book, and then I'll do the Hirsch book. But let me tell you a little bit about this one. The Nuremberg trials, most notable for their aim to bring perpetrators of Nazi war crimes to justice in the wake of World War II, paved the way for global conversations about genocide, justice, and human rights that continue to this day. As Francine Hirsch reveals in this new study of the trials, a central part of the story has been ignored or forgotten: the critical role the Soviet Union played in making them happen in the first place. While there were practical reasons for this omission, until recently critical Soviet documents about Nuremberg were buried in former Soviet archives, and even Russian researchers had limited access, Hirsch shows that there were political reasons as well. The Soviet Union was regarded by its wartime allies as not just a fellow victor, but a rival, and it was not in the interests of Western powers to highlight the Soviet contribution to post-war justice. Stalin's show trials of the 1930s had both provided a model for Nuremberg and made a mockery of it, undermining any pretense of fairness and justice. Further complicating matters was the fact that the Soviets had allied with the Nazis before being invaded by them. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939 hung over the courtroom, as did the fact that everyone knew that the Soviet prosecution, had presented the court with falsified evidence about the Katyn massacre of Polish officers, attempting to pin one of their own major war crimes on the Nazis. For lead American prosecutor Robert Jackson and his colleagues, focusing too much on the Soviet role in the trials threatened the overall credibility of the trials themselves, and possibly even the collective memory of the war. This is the deal with the devil, the bitter fruit at the end of World War II, which was sitting at the table with the Soviets, which was papering over the fact that you needed the help of a vicious dictatorship to defeat a vicious dictatorship. And that having accepted that help, you then have to go to the table together. You are allies. So the newspapers and the popular press of the day could talk about Uncle Joe Stalin with 10 times as many deaths on his hands as Hitler had. And a lot of the people at the tables at Nuremberg knew that. They knew that perfectly well. This, like Hitler's True Believers, this is going to be incredibly difficult to read. All these things are. The theoretical studies on character and on unlived lives may be the respite that I have from the rest of it. We shall see. But that is my provisional Friday reads. There'll be other things. A lot of you are being very kind and sending me ebooks. It turns out there is no problem with EPUB. EPUB is working just fine everywhere, across the board. Even converting. I'm finding it easier to convert EPUBs into Mobi for the Amazon Kindle than I am doing anything else. EPUB just seems to be the form that I work best with. A lot of you are sending me books, new and old, and that is great. So that a lot of those I'm not going to turn down gifts like that, and I'm not going to ignore them either. So a lot of those books will form a part of my weekend reading. But those are all miscellaneous. Those are just according to whoever sends me what, whereas these are new. So I thought I would bring them to your attention. And as usual, on a Friday, I would love to know what your own Friday reads is, what you're doing on Friday, what you're reading this weekend. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.